what drives contagion? It's a very good question. And so what are the surprising cases? It's also a very good question. My general lesson from 20 years of research here can be summarized in a couple of sentences. The financial channels are truly the important ones. So for example, if you have a country like Russia, that they have a crisis and that affects how financial intermediaries can continue doing their job, imagine negatively, then that propagates around the world. And those are the true important channels of contagion. Those are the true significant ones. And you can see that in 2008. The subprime market truly in the United States was tiny, was less than $1 trillion. So truly, from the financial sector point of view, if you look at 2007, the total financial sector was about $27 trillion, everything. Subprime was only $1 trillion. So in relative terms, should be small. But where it was not small is because that $1 trillion suddenly affected insurance companies, it affected investment bankers, and then when the next investment banker goes bankrupt, then another bank goes bankrupt, and so on. And that's the propagation. So the true important propagation happens through the financial sector. That's one very important lesson from that. The second, and I think that's kind of the depressing part of the lesson, is that it always propagates through a channel that we didn't know existed. We learned something from one crisis. For example, we learned that if two countries are lending to each other, that will impact the crisis in one country will have a big impact on the other. For example, that will impact the size of the propagation. And indeed it happens. So it happens during the Asian crisis that Japanese banks were lending to Thailand, they were lending to Korea, they were lending to Malaysia. So when Thailand goes bankrupt, well, that affects the ability of the Japanese banks to lend to Malaysia. So that affected Malaysia and then Indonesia and so on. The interesting thing is that once we learn that channel of contagion that I just described never happens again. The next time, there are different institutions. And the reason why that happens is that once you learn how a crisis took place, then we start paying attention. And therefore, it's hard that we make the same mistake. We make the same mistake in a different institution. So savings and loans, we made big mistakes on regulation savings and loans. Well, that was the last time we had a savings and loan crisis. So then we made a different mistake that allowed a different type of institution to overborrow, to lend too much, and then we go through a crisis. Always the mechanism is the same. But what is interesting is that the propagation and who's the culprit changes one time. It's a one-time issue. So every crisis is like one single propagation. That's why it's so hard to predict. It happens to be that some crises have had very little impact because there was no channel available at that moment to propagate. It was not because we were smart. It's because it was just did not happen because, well, one reason could be the country is small, but the other more important reason is because regardless of the size of the country, is because the propagation did not exist because there was no linkages in the financial sector at that particular point in time. The good part is that means that the next crisis I have to write a new paper. One paper per crisis.